Hey everybody, it's Eugene Lee Show here, and welcome to Forensics Talks. This is episode number 26. And as usual, just before we begin, I'm just going to make a couple of announcements here just so that we get this out there. The first one is that there is a photogrammetry for forensics week that I've been putting on. And actually, I did a webinar on Monday, did a webinar on Wednesday. Tomorrow is the last webinar, but there is still time to register. So if you just head over to my website there, ai2-3d.com. And the other thing is you could just register over here at /P4F. If you do that, it'll bring you right to the registration page that you're seeing right here. Also, coming up just around the corner, this is going to be starting on Monday, is the Canadian Society of Forensic Science Conference, June 21st to 24th. I'm one of the main organizers, and we have a jam-packed a bunch of sessions. We already have over 300 people registered for the conference. We have an international group of presenters. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. If you head over and you're interested, we have the official program here that you can look at, and we have information, abstracts, and everything else. There's still time to register if you're interested. So by all means, please join in. Also, if you're interested, I always forget to do this, but if you are joining in, go ahead and type in the chat comments where you're from. And we always like to know if there's people internationally and that sort of thing. So by all means, I'll just type in here, just ask the question where everybody is from, and we'll have a look at that. And if you have any questions, by all means, please put it in and we can ask our guests some questions. All right. Well, today my guest is Thomas Kimbriel, and Tom is a retired law enforcement officer in South Texas, and he started his career in the U.S. Army. He continued as a police officer, detective, and patrol sergeant for the Harlingen Police. He served 10 and a half years there, and then he moved on to the U.S. Border Patrol, where he spent the next 20 years. So he had quite a lengthy career. In 2015, Tom was tasked with developing the evidence collection team for the Rio Grande Valley sector, and there he developed the infrastructure and training program for entry-level crime scene teams at each of the 9 stations that comprise the RGV sector. He's trained nearly 200 agents in this position, and in 2016, the Rio Grande Valley sector established the Missing Migrant Program. And this is a liaison between the foreign consulates and the Border Patrol, regarding or on the subject of missing persons. In 2017, the Missing Migrant Program called Tom to ask for some help to identify a drowning victim via fingerprints, and I think that's going to be one of the launching points of our talks. But also, he's now teaching, or has been teaching, a course at Texas Southmost College. It's a forensic macrophotography course, and it was first offered in November 2020. And so I'm not going to say much more than that. I'm going to bring him in here. So, hey, Tom, how you doing?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Fantastic. First off, I want to say, I really appreciate you being here. And it's nice to see somebody with such a lengthy career that's still interested in teaching and still has passion for what they're doing. So, I think that's one of the things that interests me most about you. So good on you for that one.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. I want to start maybe just a little bit earlier in your career and just talk about, kind of how you got into policing and such. I don't know if you have a history or a family of with policing and that sort of thing. Was it something that you kind of fell into, or, were you forced into it, or did you, something you really wanted to do?
Well, I started out life as an auto mechanic, and I ran into some dishonesty, and I couldn't stomach it. And so as I got home the day that I quit, almost the first thing that came up was an Army commercial. My father was a military policeman, was married in his military police uniform. And so as 20-year-olds do, that was all I needed to make a decision,
Yeah.
And, but as I was on the job and doing the job, I realized that it was just the thing that I was best at.
Okay. Tell me about some of the time you spent at Harlingen, because you had a few different positions there. And you were on patrol. Were you doing any forensics at the time at Harlingen?
So when I went into investigations after a few years, that was when I really got in my first taste in forensics, and I was crimes against persons. So even if I was not primary on the homicide, I was one of the crew on the homicides. Obviously worked a lot of the lesser assaults and whatnot. But my first involvement in a murder case was, I can't remember exactly, but within weeks of becoming an investigator. And I found murder investigation to be so unique, how you sort of step into that person's life and you find out about a whole culture of people that in a town you've lived in your whole life you didn't know existed. And it's strange how someone can live in the same town and have such a different life experience than you have, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway,
how big is Harlingen?
Harlingen is about, well, at the time it was about 65,000. I think it's closer to 70 right now.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure, honestly.
Okay. It's a good size, though. I mean, it's a fairly good size city. Yeah. Okay.
The issue with this area is there's several towns that the borders touch. And then on the Mexican side, we have Matamoros, which is, depending on whether or not you count the outlying towns, which I feel like you have to. It's like any metroplex here. They're part of the city. Is well over 1 million. Reynosa is just down the road, about 45 miles away. I think it's very close to 1 million. And then our side of the river is it's approaching 2 million. So we really are policing a metroplex with the resources of $70,000 or 70,000 population.
I see. So what made you move over to the Border Patrol?
When I came back from the military, I applied to the state police, Harlingen Police, and the Border Patrol at that time. But at that time, I would have to go to California, and I'm a Texan. It's an illness that goes to the bone. And so basically Harlingen was offering me a check and I went with them. However, several years later, my youngest son's best friend, his dad was in the Border Patrol. And these two boys were almost Siamese twins. And it was him that recruited me into the Border Patrol. He knew about my military background and whatnot, and he said, "You'd be perfect for this." And I really enjoyed my time in the Border Patrol.
What was your progression like there? So you started, I mean, what kinds of things were you doing when you started? I mean, you were there 20 years. So when you started and when you sort of, what was the progression of sort of responsibilities and tasks that you were doing in your time there?
Well, it's a very interesting organization, a very unique organization where I was a Marine captain. I worked in the Marine operations, worked on the river. This area has ranch land to cover. It's about 40 miles from south to north. So you have the Metroplex down below. Then you have all ranch land. There's really 3 roads to go through it. And they go straight through it. And then you have a population on the other side, but you have this weird, unique kind of nothing but cattle ranch land in between. And so we worked ranch land. And when you work ranch land, it's like being transported through time to the 1800s where you follow footprints and that's all you have.
Wow.
Very little electronic assistance or anything else. It's all how the grass bends and that, which I loved.
Okay. Let me ask about the issues that you have in the southern border. I mean, obviously there's 2 borders. There's the Canadian border and in the Canadian border, there's obviously, I mean, there's always a concern where there's a border, but I don't think there's that kind of, there are a lot of Canadians running into the U.S. and vice versa. Really, I mean, maybe some criminals or whatever, but it's a different situation on the Mexico border. So, what kind of things or what kind of reasons do you have for people coming in on the border, and what kind of issues do you face? Does the Border Patrol face?
Well, the the biggest issue is the amount of territory that we have to cover.
Mm.
And the first thing that a person who is coming north would have to encounter is the Rio Grande River. And it is a river only in the historical sense. Way back during the 40s, they built several dams, and now it's an irrigation system. So what's also that makes it peculiar is that it is sand bottom. There is no rock base. And so you get a bottom that shifts all the time, and currents change, and water is let in and then not let in and let in. And so you get very bizarre currents, and the water rolls on a horizontal axis and twirls on a vertical axis at times. And even I've been on it many, many hours on a boat, and even with 3 grown agents with the boat on plane, the boat can go sideways without warning, with no surface disturbances whatsoever.
Okay.
So a lot of people drowned in it. And so that brings up a lot of the people that are drowning. And then the second leg is the ranchland area. It is very dense, very, I heard a man from Louisiana say it's very angry brush. There's a lot of cactus, and almost every plant has some sort of thorn on it. There are a lot of wild animals, not really a danger to humans, except for the rattlesnakes.
Mm-hmm.
And the rattlesnakes are actually, they get to almost story-like proportions. It's not unusual to see a snake as big around as your leg.
Yeah.
And those big snakes can actually break the tib fib when they strike you in the shin.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the big problems. But one of the things that causes a lot of problems for them is our brown recluse spider.
Mm.
It's a horrific spider, does awful damage. That's one of the other things. But the biggest problem for them is it's depending on how good their guide is, it's 20 to 40 miles of walking. And this is walking in deep sand. It's not hard ground or any kind of loamy soil or anything like that. The brush is so dense that it will cut out any breeze. And our normal humidity is between 80 and 90%.
Wow.
So it feels like a greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning of my career, the mom, pop, the uncle kind of guide, they would take 3 and 4 days to make the journey. Now they do it about 28 hours.
Really?
So that's 16, 18 hours straight of walking in
Wow.
deep sand. So you can see that change, and it was a change with the move to the cartel, where there's really no value to the human life. And that actually changed why people are dying. Originally, people died of thirst. Now they're dying from rhabdomyolysis, which is basically overwork the muscle so much it releases myoglobin and plugs up the kidneys. And then once you get renal failure, well, it's, all of the other organs are like cards,
Mm-hmm.
house of cards. And unfortunately, we lose a lot of people like that.
So is the majority of what you see, or what would be the percentage breakdown of, people that are coming over for, families or a new beginning, let's say, and then versus more malicious reasons?
Well, I think that well, that's a difficult split to go. And actually, it seems crazy, but the more you know about it, the harder that determination is to
Yeah.
make. But a lot of them are, in my opinion, someone who has been duped by the old snake oil salesman, come to the United States, a land where everybody makes millions of dollars, and there's work everywhere, and you'll be a wealthy person. And but it's not like it used to be. It used to be just you paid for the journey. Well, the journey is now so expensive that you owe them. And it's like the Appalachian Mine Company. You make $12 and spend 16 at the company store. You're never free.
Right. Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, from many sources, this fictional lifestyle of coming here and being, everything will be wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
The yellow brick road, that are duped into coming here. So that's your largest percentage. But
Okay.
The thing to remember is every convicted felon that is not legally in the United States is immediately deported. And as soon as they can make a U-turn and come back, they come back.
Okay.
So
I read at the beginning that in 2017 you were called to assist with a drowning and
right.
trying to help make an identification. So you have kind of two extremes, right? Because you've got this very dry, if you're left there, I mean, it's humid, but it's hot, right? I mean, it's
Right.
hot and sunny, whatever. And then you have the opposite, which is you find a body in the water. I'm assuming that you've worked on both types of scenarios, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So can you talk about that first case and how you sort of got into the idea of the macrophotography and some of the techniques that you were using at the time, and what were the challenges?
Sure, absolutely. When we got the call, I didn't have any of the traditional postmortem identification equipment, but having been to the morgue many times, I knew that the pathologist usually had the old tools just kind of hanging around. And so I prepped some materials that I had. I cut strips and whatnot. And I went over there. But the thing that I did have on right there available to me was a camera set with a macrophotography, with a macro lens. And so I took that, and I knew that worst case scenario, I could shoot a picture if I couldn't capture using the traditional method. So I had a fingerprint analyst who used to work at the Phoenix Police Department and knows as much about cameras as any person I've ever met in my life. And I said, give me some tips. I want to give you the best product I can, because I knew he would be the person who was going to receive my collection.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gave me some excellent tips, some stuff I wouldn't have thought of. And I went over there. Well, as soon as I got there, what I found was a drowning victim. And so our drowning victims have been in the water 5 to 7 days. The thing that makes it so different is that traditionally, in a lake setting or something like that, after 3 days, they usually will, barring being caught by a tree or something, will pop up. But the lack of the rock bottom makes the river very deep. So it has, I hate to use the word cliff, but it's the only thing I could think of on either side. So it makes observing the water from any point on land very difficult. You have to be almost at the water level to see much of the river at all. And it is extremely curvy. I remember there was a place where when you were working that area, you had 4 miles of highway, which is as close as you can to the river, but you had 12 miles of river.
Because of the...
Yeah, because it's so curvy.
Right.
And the bodies are not spotted by people right away. And so they are usually quite decomposed. So when I got there, this guy was well beyond any of the traditional methods would ever be able to capture. There's just no way you could have ever done it. But I could see ridge detail. And I said to myself, if I can see the ridge detail, I can control the light and I can use some macrophotography techniques and I can shoot a picture of this. And so I attempted it, and it was successful. And I thought to myself, and even the pathologist, Dr. Norma Farley, said, I can't believe we're trying fingerprints on this guy, you know. And so it kind of opened up the idea of what is possible. You know, how far can we go with this? Mm-hmm. And so I told her, I said, you know, I want you to call me whenever you have one of these, and let's see how far this will go. So with the moisture cases, we're mostly drownings. Okay. I started noticing something that looked like grease. And so I asked I was complaining about it over my shoulder to the doctor, and Dr. Farley identified it as adipocere, commonly known as death wax. Mm-hmm. Well, I had been trying to clean it as though it was a grease, and apparently it's closer chemically to soap. So obviously soap was not cleaning the soap. So I went online and I found a study. This is actually an example of rehydration.
This is rehydration. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we can circle back.
We'll get back to that then.
Yeah. And so I found a study, and it was from forensic entomologists. And it was, gosh, I said I'd be able to remember this. It was reference to the cleaning of puparia in the study of the ground underneath the body. So I think most of our audience is familiar with what they do and how they can look at all the different species and the number of generations and determine how long the body has been there. And they are encountering the same death wax that I am. And they have developed a 3-step chemical process to clean that. And so my assumption was, well, if it's good enough to clean something so fragile, the skin, the epidermis, and later on I found the dermis to be quite useful. If you clean that off of there, we will get more ridge detail, and it seems to be gentle enough. So we tried it, and sure enough, it worked.
Okay, great.
And so then we started doing a lot of the water cases. Well, we got our first desiccation case. With the desiccation case, you usually, in most cases, can see the ridges. And you can have I will tell you that we estimated that this woman was down for a week, but you have to understand, I have heard a pathologist say that a week in Texas, South Texas, can be 2 weeks farther north and 3 weeks up where y'all in Canada.
Sure. So
it's just because of the heat and something about the amount of microbes in the air. I didn't completely catch that part, but so this was the skin had turned completely jet black. This was completely mummified, but without having to do any chemical technique, we were able to shoot the ridges. So why is that different? Well, the only alternative to that is some sort of casting. And if you cast, you're going to send that to the lab, and they're going to take a macro photo of it. So you can actually take the photo in 1/10 the time it takes you to cast it.
Right.
Which is what they're going to use anyway. So
Yeah.
it just sort of makes sense to go ahead and take the picture yourself.
Sure.
Now, the reason why you couldn't use, for the older folks that are watching, might remember the old acetate and magnetic powder and the transfer back to white and that whole process. You have to get the powder to adhere to the ridges and then effectively transfer back to the acetate. Well, the same thing is true of ink. You have to first get the ink to adhere to the ridge, and then you have to get it to transfer effectively. And that's where the problem is, especially with drownings. With the drowning, there's this never-ending stream of water coming out of the skin, and I've learned all kinds of different things you can do to dry that, and you can get an okay roll. However, you can dye that same skin and shoot a picture that's so high resolution that you can actually still see the original pores. And you can do it in less time than it takes for you to try and get a roll. And the great thing about the technology is most people already have the camera in inventory.
Yeah, for sure.
And
that makes a lot of sense.
And then the chemicals involved in the cleaning process, we get them at the pool supply and Walgreens or the drugstore. They're not expensive. They're not anything you have to have special equipment for. You don't have to have special storage for. The one that I will say, from my experience, really matters is ethanol. So that one, but anyway, that's not that expensive, and all you have to have is a fireproof box to keep it in. You don't have to have ventilation and all that. I did, by the way, spend some time in a forensic lab for the purposes of developing fingerprints. I didn't get into any of the blood work or any of that other stuff, just the fingerprint part of it. And a lot of those chemicals are wonderful, but you've got to have the ventilation, and you've got to have special equipment, and there's special drainage and all kinds of stuff that has to go with that. This is not those chemicals. These are very available.
So let's go back to this image for a second. What can what can you safely tell us about this particular image?
So the other kind of case that we have come from the ranchland area that I discussed. So this is a desiccation case. Mm-hmm. So in this case, if you use your imagination, you basically have a white, dry skeleton with a husk of skin on it. There is no longer any flesh at all. There's no normal tissue. There's no interior tissue. And the husk, if you were looking at this area of the finger, the husk would be as smooth as your table in front of you. Absolutely no ridges whatsoever. But there is a study done by two Japanese scientists that I don't want to offend them by attempting to pronounce their names. that developed a rehydration process, and so we attempted it in a previous case, and we got some real good improvement, but it wasn't good enough. So I used the old coffee pot technique to bring out some more ridge detail, and we were able to get an identification. And we got that identification in 14 days. Now, without mentioning names, the place that the body was charges $350 a day for storage. And so the county contracts this other county to do their work for them. Mm-hmm. So the original county is paying $350 a day for the entire 14 days. So what we decided to do was we changed the actual protocol, not the chemical, not the solution that developed by the scientists, but we changed the protocol, and we able to get the photo that you showed in 5 days. So you can imagine the elation from the county about the savings of the 9 days of storage.
Yeah, sure.
And the thing about it is you really, if you go back to the picture, this is actually not the original photograph. This is a cell phone picture of a computer screen with that picture on it. So anyone who has any sort of experience knows how much resolution was lost in each one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know how good this photograph is.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's truly amazed us. And to the credit of the Japanese scientists, you probably could get a roll. But if you look at the some of the material that's in between the ridges,
Mm-hmm.
that would be sort of muddying up your ink print.
Right.
However, switching to photography, you can get all of this detail without having any of the issues with the transfer of the ink.
Right. In terms of equipment, what kinds of stuff are you? I mean, using anything special, or I mean, is this?
No, it really is a standard DSLR camera with a tripod, and the key for fingerprints is it must be a 1-to-1 macro. There are many variations of macro, but for their scaling, to do the 1-to-1 comparisons in the computer, you have to use a 1-to-1 macro. Now, I have a bias to the 90 millimeter because of the fact that you're not just going to use this for identification, you're going to use it for lifting latents in crime scenes. And the only good way, well, in my opinion, the only really good way to get a patent, like for instance, one in blood, is with the photography. All of the other chemicals and treatments, the amount of resolution that you lose lifting that, it does not make up for taking a couple of seconds to shoot a picture of it.
Right.
And
what about image processing or anything in software? I mean, obviously if you start with a good photo, it's, there's less work to do, but do you do anything afterwards with the image?
We do not, at the collector level, because the training is for the collector. We don't do, the only thing that we do is we take it both in JPEG and RAW format. But the actual latent print examiner has a version of, I believe it's actually Photoshop, that they use. For instance, if you're shooting directly at the finger, one of the first things they have to do is flip it. If you think about how you would roll your finger onto paper, what you're getting is a mirror image. So if the loop is off to your right, if you're looking at your finger, the loop would be off to your left if you were looking at the paper. Well, that has to be flipped. They do a lot of dropping the color out to get more contrast and ridge detail. I know my friend Tom Karn does a lot of work with grayscale, and gets amazing almost 3D contrast by using grayscale. And I don't know exactly how he does that, but we leave that processing to the fingerprint examiner.
Okay. Now, obviously, we had talked about this before, but we talked about DNA and the fact that hey, we can take a sample, but what would you say to somebody that about taking a DNA sample, the amount of in terms of time and cost?
Well, well, there's a couple of things about DNA, and please don't take this to mean that in any way I don't think DNA is important or it isn't. Actually, I think it's so important that I think we waste some of our capacity for DNA on identifications that could be done with photography, because all the time we don't spend on those identifications, we could be adding one more sexual assault case that we couldn't get in, or we're getting a faster return on those cases. There's many things that DNA is the only avenue, and I think we're kind of clogging it with stuff that could be done quicker and cheaper. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm in any way talking down about DNA. I'm not.
No, but you bring up actually a really good point, and that is that these labs are getting choked because there's people just submitting samples and samples, and so the labs are coming back now and saying, "Look, we can't take all these samples. You can give us, you know, I don't care if you got 80 samples, you're giving us 5." You know what I mean? And it's like you got to pick and choose your battles now, right? So you make a really good point there. I think that's great.
Well, the one of the things that can be tough for identifying someone via DNA is you have to have some idea who they are. Unless in the United States, anyway, they've been in prison. Well, that's not as big a group of people as you would think. I mean, there's really not that many people population-wise that have been in prison. But in our case, we don't even know what country they're from. So they're certainly not in our system unless, like I said, they've been released from prison, deported, and they're coming back in, which we do have. But we have no idea. The other way is family reference samples. Well, if you don't even know what country a person is from, how are you going to get family reference samples? So it makes it quite difficult. Yeah. But if you contrast that to fingerprints, in the United States, all arrestees and employment people are put into the FBI's database, which is about 72 million records. Any person who's ever applied to have a visa or come to the United States, legal or illegal, is in another system called OBIM, and that's 210 million records.
Wow.
Now, it's held by Customs and Border Protection. They're the ones, that's their database. And they don't share it because these are not criminals.
Right.
And they won't share it with anybody else for that very same reason. We don't want non-criminals mixed with criminals. But if it's a humanitarian purpose, like identifying a person who's passed or something like that, they will search it. And so very few, there are some that are in both databases. Obviously, some people do commit crime, but it's not as mixed as you would think. So you have this huge, and that's just US owned. And it wasn't until I was in the missing migrant program that I learned that we call, in Central America, we call the triangle, which is the countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, have high quality digital records on every adult.
Really?
Every single adult. The purpose is to avoid voter fraud, but these are very good images. Not just in the fidelity of the digital image, but in the technique used in collecting it. They're nice rectangular nail-to-nail rolls. They're good.
Uh-huh.
And because they're electronic, they can be sent back and forth through email. And all of this process can happen within the hour sometimes, maybe not the time with the fingerprint examiner. But going back to the original point, there was a case where we was early on, and we had identified a person by fingerprints after 3 days. And that was this country's first experience with it. And the family said that's not real science. And we want to be sure that this is our loved one. And so we want DNA. And so the county said, you can't keep that person here anymore, so you're going to have to store them. So they stored them at a contractor. And the DNA went away, and 8 months later it came back. Same person that we said it was with the fingerprints. But what was peculiar was it was one individual in 150,000. Well, the reason was the degradation of the DNA, right? Just because of decomposition. And it's not that DNA is not exact. It's just in this case, it was very degraded, and that was the error. Well, in that area, there's 300,000 people, and if you count both sides of the river, it's more like 800,000 people. So it's not that significant to say that it's this person, you know. However, one finger, and the fingerprint is 1 in 64 billion.
Right.
In this case, it was the index and middle in succession. I don't even know how to start the math for that.
Right.
Or what that number would look like. But the call was put out by the consulate to the county and said, hey, you need to pay for the storage on this person. And they said, what are you talking about? The 8 months of storage was $85,000.
Holy mackerel.
And the county said, we identified them scientifically after 3 days. That expense is yours. So between the consulate and the funeral home and the family, that $85,000, I don't know the particulars of how it was paid, but that expense had to be absorbed.
Yeah, sure. No kidding.
Go ahead.
No,
one of the desiccation cases that we had, we were able to do the identification in 3 days, and the justice of the peace. For those of you who are not familiar with the peculiarity of Texas law, in small population counties, there's a justice of the peace, a magistrate, if you will, that does the inquest, the legal inquest. And so she had lots of experience with this particular case. And because we did it in 3 days, she said, you know, that saved us $3,500 on that one case. Well, this county is Kennedy County, and it borders Brooks County. Brooks County was bankrupt for 5 years because of human remains, the costs associated with human remains by itself. They're just that, bankrupt the entire county.
Wow.
So
at what point, I'm just thinking about the course. And so at some point you said, hey, I think I got something here, and it makes business sense. It's a very practical application and that sort of thing. So what made you decide, hey, I'm going to do a course, or did somebody ask you, hey, you need to teach this?
Actually, kind of both. There's more than one person that said, we need you need to teach this. You need to try and publish it and whatnot. And borrowing from my experience teaching people to collect, and I used macrophotography as part of that collection, I realized how much time in practical application this needed. So I said, you know, and I don't want to disparage any agencies, but I was at a very professional agency, very large agency, who had an evidence room that you could put an 18-wheeler in evidence, the entire thing. And yet a case with multiple fatalities, no one had done fingerprints. Mm-hmm. And so what I gathered from that is macrophotography, in like many things, comes into popularity and then fades away, and it comes into popularity and it fades away. Well, this is apparently a time period where a lot of people have gotten away from macrophotography. So the course starts off with the standard crime scene, because before I can have you taking these very difficult postmortem pictures, I need to make sure that you can take regular macros and you can do time exposure, and you are competent with painting with light. Because in a lot of these, as you saw in the one picture, you've got multiple colors that you're dealing with. You have an extremely round subject, and you're very close. So a lot of these things are pushing the camera to its limit. So it becomes very necessary for me to make sure that you can walk before you can run. And so that's how it's designed in 2 steps, 2 one-week classes. The first is really focuses in on the crime scene aspect of it, the latents, the patents, and a lot of stuff that people can't believe are possible, even with seatbelt buckles. seatbelt buckles are a wealth of fingerprint identifications. The interior rear view mirrors. I did a case where the new F-150 has a chrome strip down the gear selector. And we did an 11 photo series where they put that together and identified the person by their palm print.
Yeah, interesting.
Because we had a very good suspect in that case. But so I want to make sure that you can do all of those things. And there are focal series and there are light series. And I even do an radial ulnar series. So there's all these just skills. They're just really skills that I need to be there and watch you take the pictures and help you with the camera position and to get you to that point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had this conversation with somebody actually last night. So a forensic photographer from Florida, and we were talking about, just photography skills in general. And oftentimes I think what happens is, you're an agency or department, they go, here's the equipment. And then, they don't give people the right kind of training, or maybe it's just expected that they know their cameras. But, a lot of people, let's face it, a lot of people just go, automatic click, click, click. But when you're trying to do what you're trying to do, or, or as like in some of the stuff, like the photogrammetry, or when you're trying to use it for more than just capturing, just a picture, then you need to address the photo differently, and you need to know your camera and understand what's going on. So I've always said, like, I'm always surprised by the number of people that actually don't really know their cameras as well as they probably should. And I don't know if you find that too.
Right. And just as you do in your course, the course does begin with some basic introduction to the cameras, so that that when we start pushing the camera later on in the course, they do understand the variables, three main variables. And we do lots of practicals along the way to make sure that they truly understand how that works. And the other thing from my personal experience that we do is we prepare for them in advance a field manual. But we give it to them the first day of the class, and I have them annotate as they go through the class, because that's the way I view the situation, but you might have a different way of looking at it. And this is your chance while we're going through the class to make those annotations really to yourself, your future self at the crime scene.
Right.
When you're at the morgue, or you're there trying to get that fingerprint in blood, to write that note to yourself in the future, and fairly well protected, and you're able to decon it if you need, if it's a crime scene, you might need to decon it. So, but you do leave, and for almost every agency has the gear for this. The person that used to use it isn't there anymore, or something like that, or they're now promoted up, or however.
Right.
But for those who don't, we have a kit available that the students can purchase, and but it is very geared. In other words, it doesn't have as many features, but so that it means the camera is very light, and the tripod is very strong in comparison, because we do a lot of leaning and whatnot with these techniques, and we do very long exposures as a rule, usually painting with light with very deep f-stop. And so it's one of the other things for those of us who are not quite as tall, it has a screen that comes out for those latent fingerprints up on the top of the vehicle.
Yeah. I'm just going to show a couple of things just for those. I actually dropped a couple of links into the chat window, so for those that want to see. But there's actually an article here, and that's one of the links I dropped in. Just gives a description of what Tom is doing here at the Texas Southmost College. And also, you can do a search. You can also look at there's an article here from the college as well. And also, Tom, if it's okay with you, your people can reach you through your email address.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's your university address, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm gonna drop that in the chat window too, just for people. Do you mind if I'm gonna there's a question here from somebody, and I'm just gonna pop that up if that's
Sure.
okay. All right, here. So this is Fatima Rinci, and she says, "Are there any similarities in fingerprints of people in the same area or country?" Um,
It's
yeah? Do you have any interesting thoughts there or stories there?
it's actually very interesting, and one of the things that I think, to me, makes fingerprints very interesting is the only similarity that you might find would be in very close relationship, like siblings, is a general classification. However, it is not true. I mean, it's not something you could rely on. The fact of the matter is that identical twins would have identical DNA strands, but they often have completely different classifications of fingerprints. So the fingerprints are actually formed in utero between the 10th and 16th week. And because twins are oriented in opposite directions, their little fingertips are touching different things. And it's that pressure on those fingertips that causes these different patterns. And the thing that I think is so amazing is that people with the same DNA end up with completely different fingerprints.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting for sure. Um, Well, look, we're kind of getting on in time here, so I've punched in your email address there and everything, and I mean, we've been talking about the photogrammetry stuff, and there's more that I think we're gonna be doing together in the future because you actually inspired me to do something that I wasn't thinking about because you asked me about could I do photogrammetry on a fingerprint, so I think we're doing some cool stuff right now. So yeah, I have to thank you for that. Um, but yeah, look, I want to say thanks again for popping in and sharing your story and stuff like that. I would, tell people, hey, if you can go to the links, have a look, read up a little bit. Maybe at some point, are you thinking at all about bringing the training on the road at some point in the future?
I um, I haven't broached that yet. I want to make sure that I have a clear idea of what that is. And what I mean by that is I have trained on the road before, and this is more equipment than I would have used
Yeah,
before. And how do you do that? And I don't want someone to have less of a class. For instance, in forensic photography, macrophotography, one, when we're working on fingerprints on cars, if the rain comes, I have a place to bring the car indoor
hmm,
at Texas Southmost. So I have a solution to all of these little problems. Whereas you take so many photos where the rain could stop it, it could really eat up a big portion of the school if we had rain as an issue. So there's little technical things like that. I don't want to rule it out, but it's kind of far off right now.
yeah,
There's,
okay, sure.
yeah,
I know how that goes, dragging equipment around and everything else
right.
around the
Yeah.
country, and it's a fairly lengthy course too, right? Like, it's a 2 week course, is it not?
Well, they're separated into 2 weeks. Because and here's every agency needs somebody can do the identification part, but they're really every investigator needs to know how to lift prints with a camera. You don't necessarily need to lift every print in a case on a camera. I don't even believe that's to be the truth myself.
Hmm.
Um, and not every case needs it. But when it is that serious felony and you've got a good print and that print is not going to transfer to paper, you could have captured it and solved that case or given yourself an excellent suspect. And we lost it just because we don't know how to take the picture, I can't imagine. It just drives
Right.
me crazy, thinking about
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it. Just hang back a second. I'm just going to make some closing remarks, and then I'll come back and chat with you a bit more. So,
okay.
hey, thanks again, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers. All right, folks. Well, that does it for this episode. And again, just some very brief reminders that if you are still interested in the Canadian Society of Forensic Science Conference next week, there is time to register. So please have a look. Have a look at the agenda that's on there, because the schedule is really impressive. A lot of great topics, very, very diverse set of disciplines that are being represented there. And also tomorrow, I'll be having the last of 3 webinars on the photogrammetry for Forensics Week, and there is still time to register. You can also catch up on the previous recordings once you register. You should get access to all 3 of the or all 2 of the previous webinars, and then finally tomorrow the last one there. So that does it for this episode. Next week, I'm going to be dedicated to that Canadian Society of Forensic Science Conference, so there likely will not be an episode next week. I'm going to do my best, going to see if I can squeeze something in there, but if not, I'll be back as soon as possible, and we'll get the show back on the road. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.